Hello everyone, good evening. Many thanks first of all to Ani, without whom none of this would be possible. I salute her greatly and always for MPV, because even though I don't join the group, I'm very much with solidarity with the group. I don't join any group. I'm kind of like those Groucho Marx people who say, any group that would take me, I don't want to belong to. But it's just because I'm just a commitment phobe. But honestly, I so salute Ani and everything she's done with MPV. And we go way back to Progressive Muslim Union of North America and praying behind Amina Wadood. And those days back in 2003 and 2004, when being a progressive Muslim in the United States meant nothing, basically. Because it meant being, 5 or 6 people in the face of the Council on American Islamic Relations and Islamic Society of North America and all of these other, big Muslim groups, and, where do we fit in there? And, it didn't matter. And that's really the kind of the essence of my talk today. It doesn't matter that you're the minority. I think, if anything, it's more important that you are the minority. If I ever find myself a member of the majority, I will leave and somehow find a place where I belong to the minority. Because I think if you ever find yourself belonging to the majority, that's really when the alarm bell should ring, and you should wonder, what do you represent and who are you? Because the majority is never a good place to be. You should always belong to the minority. And that's why I'm very proud to be a supporter and a friend, a very dear friend of the Muslims for Progressive Values. Whether today they're a minority or a majority is irrelevant, but they started off as a minority, because we all started off as progressive Muslims as a minority, as I said, in 2003, 2004. Now, I speak to you today as an Egyptian and as an American and as a progressive Muslim, as Egyptians have taken to the streets in their hundreds of thousands to stand up to the Muslim Brotherhood. And there could not be a better time for me to speak to you. Because for the longest time, there's been this fantasy. Despite what happened in Iran, there's been this fantasy that the Muslim Brotherhood could somehow deliver to us this la-la land on this earth called an Islamic State. And it truly is a la-la land, because what it is a land that belongs to very ultra-conservative Sunni Muslim men. And if you're not an ultra-conservative Sunni Muslim man, that world is not your world. If you're a woman, if you're gay, if you're lesbian, if you're trans, if you're a feminist, if you're anything but an ultra-conservative Muslim man, that world is not your world. And it's really important to understand this. And I'm so glad that we're having a revolution in Egypt right now, because even though we're not at the stage of discussing all these things, being gay, being lesbian, being trans, being feminist, we started a discussion. And where I position myself right now in the intersectionality that you've heard discussed earlier today is in this in a kind of very early initial stage of a Muslim community rising up against an ultra-Sunni conservative group that for a very long time presented itself as the only proper Muslim group there was to belong to. Now, when I moved to the United States in 2000, I often say that I came here to basically perform my American Hajj. And I've been on Hajj being pilgrimage. I've been on pilgrimage 4 times, so you can call me Hajj Mona. I mean, I'm serious about Sunni Muslim stuff. I've done it all. I wore a headscarf for 9 years. I went on to Mecca for pilgrimage 4 times. I did the whole thing. I bought the whole ultra-conservative Sunni Muslim thing that was sold to me, and I tried it, and it did not work. And it didn't work because I realized that in order for it to work for me, I had to perform mental gymnastics, which would make my life impossible. My life being a woman, my life being a feminist, and you can add all the other minorities that you can think of, being gay, being lesbian, being trans, being feminist, being anything, again, other than an ultra-conservative Sunni Muslim man. And here's the thing, Islam is not just for ultra-conservative Sunni Muslim men. I mean, we often, when we talk about feminism, we're often given Khadija as the best example, right? Khadija, being Prophet Muhammad's first wife, actually belongs to what we are called, or what we call, or what we're taught to call, the Jahiliyyah, right? Which is the age of ignorance. But here's the thing, this is the really difficult question for us to answer. If it was truly the age of ignorance, what was it in that so-called age of ignorance that brought about a woman who was not only a businesswoman, but a divorcee, a very rich and successful businesswoman who was 15 years older than Muhammad, who proposed to him. Why was she able to do that from this so-called age of ignorance? And what happened, what destroyed this era that allowed this woman to propose to a man who's 15 years younger than her and who is her junior and her employee, Why was she able to do that in this so-called age of ignorance, whereas the age of Islam that we all celebrate has not created someone like her? What is it that in our practice of Islam has destroyed Khadija? And in order for the women's contribution that Khadija began, but in order for the revolution of Egypt to continue, we need to create the brigades of Khadija, what I call Khadija's daughters. I want to see a revolution by Khadija's daughters. And Khadija's daughters basically are women in Tahrir Square, women in Saudi Arabia, women in Tunisia, women in any country that not only has a Muslim majority population, but here in the United States as well, where we have Muslim women. If we're not able to create the daughters of Khadija, we must ask why we're not able to create the daughters of Khadija, which is again why I think the Egyptian revolution is so important right now. The Egyptian revolution has three main demands. They are bread, liberty, and social justice. And I totally and utterly accept those three demands as demands of progressive Islam, because I believe that progressive Islam is ultimately about social justice. If we do not make the revolution that progressive Islam is trying to bring about in the United States, in the Arab Muslim world, in whatever world you want to call it, if it's not about social justice, then it's a meaningless revolution. In Egypt right now, people are able to stand up to Mohammed Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood because they're able to tell Mohammed Morsi, you have not delivered on social justice. This is really important. Mohammed Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood can talk about Sharia, and they talk about Islam, and they talk about what Islam, or what they think Islam preaches, and many people are too scared to stand up to what they say. Many people are willing to perform those mental gymnastics in which a part of their mind says, yes, I'm a Muslim that believes in all of this, but the rest of my mind says, this is total and utter crap. This means nothing. In order to reconcile the two parts of your brain, you have to think, we have to fight for social justice. Because if we want to continue being Muslims today, in the world today, we have to fight for social justice. Because fighting for social justice will not only ally us with the revolutionaries in Egypt and Tunisia and Syria, but it will also ally us with the revolutionaries in New York, the Occupy Sandy people, for example, who continue to provide aid today, more than a month after, what is it, Superstorm now? I never know what to call it anymore. Hurricane, Superstorm, whatever it's called, Sandy, right? So it's been more than a month since this Sandy thing hit, but the state, New York State, has not been able to deliver for a lot of New Yorkers. And the New Yorkers that have not been helped by New York State are the poor. This is where social justice comes in. This is where intersectionality comes in. This is where we understand where Occupy and being a progressive Muslim and being a revolutionary Egyptian, all of them come in. And also being an Egyptian feminist, which is what I very much identify with. Because unless I want to be some kind of creature that is about to become extinct, one of the things that I always hear is, who do you represent anyway? What are you, an Egyptian feminist? This I've heard for so many years. I really don't care. Because at the end of the day, I represent a kind of social justice that I believe without which Islam is meaningless. Now, I was in Spain over the summer, speaking at a reggae festival. And besides people smoking a lot of pot, a reggae festival is very important for social justice, because reggae actually does address the issue of social justice. And in a country like Spain, that has gone through a lot of fascism, that is very similar to the fascism that we are trying to overthrow in many parts of the world that are described as Muslim majority, my country, Egypt, being among them, to look at Spain and how Spain was able to overthrow that fascism is very important. Now, Spain had a fascism that is of the military, that is Franco, so it was a military fascism with weapons, but it also had a religious fascism. So it had the Vatican, and it had a fascism that claimed to have God on its side. So when I was in Spain speaking at this reggae festival, I said to them, because people always ask me, how many Egyptians really care about women's rights? Because somehow, because we're Egyptian, because we're Arab, because we're Muslim, we're supposed to be other, we're supposed to be some kind of alien race that really doesn't care about rights, and unless 99.9% of us care about rights, rights don't matter anymore. I guarantee if you went to Alabama and you asked people in Alabama, how many of you agree to having a mosque open in Alabama, 99.9% would say no. So let's just get over this majority business. Let's talk about social justice and let's talk about rights. So when the Spaniards got rid of Franco and they had a fascism with guns and the fascism with God, how did they get over it? And this is the question that I asked them, because they need to answer that question so they can stop asking me how many Egyptians support Muslim women's rights and how many Muslims support women's rights. And the answer to their question was, at that time, when they got rid of Franco and when they started to challenge the Vatican, it was only an elite and it was only a minority that was a member of that elite that was able, through its privilege, to speak to power and to say, we are going to challenge that power. And we're going to fight for feminism, and we're going to fight against the church, and we're going to fight against a military fascism. There is nothing wrong with fighting against those kind of fascisms. But for some reason, when we fight against those kind of fascisms, we're called the minority. We're called out of touch. We're called, you don't represent the majority. I don't fucking care. I promised Annie I wasn't going to swear, but I had to swear. I don't care. I don't care that I don't represent the majority. Because if the majority is misogynist, if the majority is going to use its majority status to fight against being gay or trans or feminist or anything else, I don't care about the majority. And that's exactly the position that Prophet Muhammad would take. Because if you look at his history, and if you look at his story, and if you look at how he was a true revolutionary, in that period, in Mecca, before he went to Medina and formed a community, a revolutionary community, that he then took back to Mecca, what is that if not being a revolutionary? And that is exactly the kind of revolution and exactly the kind of role model that I take to talk about what's happening in Egypt today, to talk about what's happening in Tunisia today, to talk about Syria, to talk about Yemen. And when you hear the American media talk about what's happening in the revolution, don't listen. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the US administration thinks, because 5 US administrations supported our dictator, Hosni Mubarak. It does not matter what the CIA thinks. It does not matter what NSA thinks. What matters is people on the ground. And what happened in Egypt today was a lot of Egyptians who voted for Mohammed Morsi, who was from the Muslim Brotherhood. They voted for him because they wanted a president to take us through this transitional period. Not because they wanted Sharia, not because they wanted Islam, not because they wanted whatever the Muslim Brotherhood thought that we wanted. We wanted a transitional president that would take us from Mubarak and his dictatorship to the next stage of the revolution. And Mohammed Morsi did not deliver. And because he did not deliver, the people are out on the street. And that's all you need to know. Because what the revolution has done, somebody came up with this phrase, I cannot claim, I wish I could claim this, but someone claimed that the revolution is like teaching a person who's illiterate to read and write. When you teach someone to read and write, you can never unteach them to read and write. That ability to read and write is forever. And that's what's happened in Egypt. And so we are now at a stage, it's like the perfect storm. When I moved to this country in 2000, the Middle East and North Africa was the place that many Muslims in the United States looked to for Islam. They looked to Al-Azhar, they looked to Qom, they looked to the, either the Shia or the Sunni majority, and they looked to them to teach us how to be Muslims. That was back in 2000. 12 years later, I see a United States that is very different, and a North America that is very different. We are now in a position to offer sustenance and to offer solidarity and to offer inspiration to the Muslims in Iran, to the Muslims in Egypt, to the Muslims in that part of the world that we used to look to for inspiration. And I hear from many young Muslims in Egypt especially, who write to me and say, how do we fight against the Muslim Brotherhood using religion? Now, I've never called myself an activist. I only started calling myself an activist over the past year. Some of you might know that Egyptian right police beat me and broke my arms and sexually assaulted me, and I was detained for 12 hours. That is part of my recent history. And I've only started calling myself an activist over the past year. But since about 2000, I've been a writer. So I identify much more as a writer. So as a writer, it was never my goal, nor my inspiration or ambition to just identify as a Muslim or to pretend that I was giving anybody the answer to anything. If anything, I was basically venting. I was venting against this idea that in order to be a Muslim woman, I had to perform some kind of mental gymnastics, where a part of my brain was able to say, okay, I have to accept this because this is what is needed to be a Muslim, but another part of my brain was saying, okay, this is what it means to be a human being today. You don't have to do these kind of gymnastics anymore. And this I learned when I moved to the US. While I was still in the Middle East and North Africa, this was not a lesson that I was hearing. But over the past 12 years, that kind of, the power has shifted. It truly has. When I first moved here in 2000, the majority of Muslims I knew were still looking to Al-Azhar, if they were Sunni, and to Iran, if they were Shia, for some kind of leadership. Now, especially after 9/11, and especially after recognizing, and this is exactly what we should recognize, and this is what we should be proud of, that we are Muslims in North America. We're not Muslims in Egypt. We're not Muslims in Iran. We are Muslims in North America. Once we recognize this, that compass does not have to be in Qom or in Azhar anymore. The compass is right here. My compass was to pray behind Amina Wadud in March of 2005, as she led many of us in a Friday prayer that was the first public Friday prayer led by a woman of a mixed gender. That was my compass. And to this day, that continues to be an inspiration for back there. So we have to stop thinking that we have to look back there. We don't have to look back there, because back there is looking to us to inspire them to get over the blocks that they have over there. So I think once we recognize that it's a two-way flow of communication, once we recognize that over there, they've started a revolution that is just as important over there as it is over here, we can start talking to them about how we stand up to patriarchy. And how do we stand up to patriarchy here in the United States? We talk about LGBT because we can talk about LGBT in the United States, because we can talk about how our ultra-Orthodox Jewish friends challenge their scripture and their rabbis about being gay. We can talk about how our Catholic and our Baptist and our other Christian denomination friends challenge their scripture and challenge their clergy about being gay. And in challenging their ability to be gay, we can also challenge our ability to be gay. In 2004, I attended the first ever conference for me that really opened my eyes about being Muslim and gay, which was Al-Fatiha. And there I met Imam Dai. And it was such an inspirational moment for me to meet someone like Imam Dai. And when Imam Dai and I, about 2 or 3 years ago, marched in, some of you might remember that Glenn Beck had that ridiculous Restoring Honor March. Yes, you can laugh. Al Sharpton had a counter march that I came to D.C. from New York to join. And just before we got to the Capitol, this wonderful man called Imam Dai came up to me and said, "Hey Mona, I'm Imam Dai." And I was like, "Imam Dai, oh my God." And so we ended up marching together onto the Capitol. And just as we got, we turned the corner onto the Capitol, the march, the Glenn Beck Ridiculous Restoring March was wrapping up. And it was a really historic moment for me as an Egyptian and as a very recent American, and as a revolutionary and a feminist and, blah, 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 all the other headings that I claim. As we crossed over into the Capitol, they were coming off the Capitol. And it was a real moment of new America and old America, because it was mostly old white people. And they stopped, and they were very scared, and they looked at us, and they were like, "Oh my God, who are these people?" And me and Imam Dai and people of so many different ethnic and religious and sexual and so many other identities looked at them and said, "You know what? We're the fucking future. Get used to it." And we are the people who made the last election work. We are the people who voted Obama back into office. And we have to remember that. Too often, we operate out of a position of a minority and of a position of weakness. We have to understand that when we unite, like we did in that march that Imam Dai and I marched in, when we unite in all our colors and all our sexual orientations and all our religious orientations, we are strong and we are a majority. When we allow the Christian or the Muslim or the Jewish or the Buddhist or whatever you want to call it, religious right wing, divide us, we are a weak minority. And this is how we fight patriarchy. Because patriarchy works in ways that allow old white people to win. Patriarchy only works for old white people. There are very few old white people in this room. And I mean no offense to old white people. What I do mean, seriously, what I do mean is that if you work together with us, we will not kill you. No, I'm kidding. Seriously, the message I'm trying to get across is that when we unite across our differences, we definitely dilute the strength of those who try to divide us. Whether it's Egypt, whether it's Syria, whether it's Tunisia, or whether it's the United States. And this works for patriarchy across the board. I mean, I try to fight against patriarchy in different ways. And the way that I try to fight against it is, my revolution in Egypt is quite different than my revolution in the US, but at the end of the day, really, it's exactly the same. And it's basically, I find a place where I am the minority, and I push, and I prod, and I poke, and I hurt. And in Egypt, where I'm a minority when I say, I never identify as a Muslim in Egypt. Everybody knows I'm a Muslim, but I never identify as such. I say I'm secular, I say I'm liberal, I say I'm feminist, I say I'm for gay rights, I say all the things that a Muslim is not supposed to say. And here in the United States, I say I'm a Muslim. I say I'm a Muslim because this is not supposed to be a Muslim. I say I'm a Muslim because I have a tattoo with tits. I say I'm a Muslim. I say I'm a Muslim because this is not supposed to be a Muslim, right? My sister wears a headscarf, my sister-in-law wears a headscarf, I respect both of them. But this is also a Muslim. Ani is a Muslim, Imam Dai is a Muslim, Imam Hindi is a Muslim. We are all Muslim. But here in the United States, my struggle is to say, headscarf or not, I am a Muslim. Which is exactly why I spray painted that ad, because it was racist and it was bigoted. And so far, the only people who stand up to any kind of so-called offense to Muslims have been the right-wing bearded Muslim men. It's only the Salafis in Islam have owned offense. Many of the things that they get offended at, I'm not offended at, because they're all misogynist bastards, and I really don't care about the Salafis. But there are many things that I am offended at, and that ad I was truly offended at. To call anyone today a savage is truly offensive, especially when you look at this country, the United States, and its history with the word savage. Whether you're talking about natives, or whether you're talking about African Americans, whenever you want to marginalize someone and create a situation by which you can start to basically endanger their lives, you make them out to be savages. So when I see that at my subway station in New York, I am pissed. I don't care who's putting up that message, and I'm not going to wait for Salafis to go up there, but I'm going to go out there and make a big deal. And that's exactly how I fight, because patriarchy is not just about being feminist. Patriarchy is about fighting that the man, right? We talk about the man, right? But it's like a joke to talk about the man, right? I'm fighting the man. I don't even know what that means anymore, because people go on social media and talk about fighting the man. And they think that they go on social media and they vent on Facebook and Twitter, and they've actually done something. But they've done nothing. You know, they've just like written 140 characters and nothing has been achieved. Seriously. So, unless you want to get out of that box and you want to get out there and affect change in the real world, that change that basically extends that revolution, whether it's Prophet Muhammad's revolution, whether it's Martin Luther King Jr.'s revolution, whether it's Malcolm X's revolution, whoever's revolution you want to continue, it's essentially a revolution against patriarchy, because patriarchy is that old white man. And that old white man is the old white man granddaddy God up in the sky. And I do not worship the granddaddy God in the sky. I worship a God that is of social justice. I worship the God of the Egyptian revolution. And the Egyptian revolution's demands are bread, liberty, and social justice. Those are my gods. Thank you very much.